Okay, so continuing on in our discussion of ARC Section 90A, as it relates to financial statement reviews, we're going to be going through the agreement on engagement terms. And up until this point, we have decided that we're independent and we can comply with ethical standards. We comply with ARC Section 60A and have determined that management acknowledges its responsibilities for the engagement. So we've decided to accept the engagement. And so now we need to come to an agreement on the engagement terms with our client, and that's here in ARC Section 90A.11 through 12. And it basically lays out what our engagement letter should contain and whenever we're having our client sign it. And so this agreement can either be with management or those charged with governance as appropriate. Some entities might not have a board of directors or something like that. So in that case, we have this agreement with management. And so this should be a written agreement, which we usually call the engagement letter, and it should contain the following items. It should contain the objectives of the engagement. It should contain the responsibilities of management set forth in 26C of Section 60 of ARC Section 60A, which we discussed in another video, as well as paragraph 9 of this section, which we discussed in a prior video. It should also discuss the responsibilities of the accountant. It should also discuss the limitations of a review engagement. It should discuss the identification of the applicable financial reporting framework for the preparation of the financial statements, and it should discuss the expected form and content of the accountant's review report, and a statement that there may be circumstances in which the report may differ from its expected form and content. So we need to make sure that all of these items are included in the engagement letter that the client signed. And so here it tells us that it should be signed by both us, which may be the accountant or the accountant's firm, and it should be signed by management or those charged with governance as appropriate. So we have some explanatory material here, A17 through A22. So let's go down to that explanatory material where we get some more understanding on how we should go about agreeing on the engagement terms and what should be agreed upon. Okay, so now we're down in the explanatory material section related to agreement on engagement terms. It says that both the accountant and management have an interest in documenting the agreement or the agreed upon terms of the review engagement. Therefore, there's no misunderstanding as far as the terms of the review engagement. And from our standpoint, the accountant, it reduces our risks that management might inappropriately rely on us to protect them from certain risks or to perform certain functions, including those that are management's responsibility. So remember in the prior video, there are several things that are management's responsibility, for instance, the preparation of financial statements, selection of the financial reporting framework, and all that information. And so we want to be very clear that that's their responsibility, and so they won't inappropriately expect us to perform those functions or to rely on us for that. And so depending on the entity structure, we might have this agreement with management, we might have it with those charged with governance, or with both. And so remember from ARC Section 60.26C, we're required to get management's understanding or have management acknowledge that they understand their responsibilities. So then even if our engagement letter is only with those charged with governance, then we still need to get something from management that says that they acknowledge and understand their responsibilities. So really the easiest thing to do is have both management and those charged with governance sign the engagement letter. That way we know that management understands their responsibilities. And if it so happens that we are contracted with a third party to review the entity's financial statements, then we would have an engagement letter with the third party. And so we would still need to have management agree and acknowledge their understanding of their responsibilities. So we would somehow have to have them sign that they acknowledge their responsibilities for the preconditions for review. That way we can confirm that the preconditions for the review are present. So whoever signs the engagement letter, we still need to have management to acknowledge their responsibilities. And I say here that agreement with management cannot be an oral understanding. It has to be in writing, and therefore an engagement letter is the easiest and most common way of doing that. So no matter how we decide to go about it, management has to sign a letter stating its responsibilities, and the easiest way is through an engagement letter. And so here they reiterate that it's okay if we prepare the financial statements in whole or in part, but when we're getting the acknowledgement by management, they're acknowledging it for their responsibility for selecting the applicable financial reporting framework and for the preparation of the financial statement. So they are responsible for these things, even though we can assist them in preparing financial statements. And that's a very important distinction. So here, finally, we have an Exhibit A, some illustrative engagement letters that we can use when we are starting and agreeing on the terms of an engagement with our client. So let's go down to Exhibit A and take a look at these engagement letters, and we will see that each of the items from the requirements above are included in these engagement letters. So let's go there now. Okay, so now we're down in Exhibit A with some illustrative engagement letters for review engagement. We have two examples here. One of them is a review performed in accordance with GAAP, and another performed in accordance with a tax basis of accounting. So the first report included with GAAP is here, and we see here that it's addressed to management. It tells us which financial statements are under review. It gives a list of our responsibilities as the accountant, and that is to prepare the financial statements and to obtain limited assurance as a basis for whether we're aware of any material modifications that should be made to the financials. It tells that we're performing this engagement in accordance with Sawyer's, and we have responsibilities under the Code of Professional Conduct from the AICPA. That's our ethical requirements. It tells them what review engagement includes, and it also tells them what a review engagement is not. Next, we have management's responsibilities, as we just discussed. So, for instance, their selection of accounting principles and their financial reporting framework is their responsibility. They're responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements, even if we are required to prepare them, as we see here. Management is still overall responsible for them, as we see here. They're responsible for the internal controls, prevention and detection of fraud. They're responsible for providing us all the information that we need to perform our engagement, and also responsible for providing us a representation letter. So all of these items were included in the last video that we discussed. And next, it describes what our review report will look like and what it should contain, which was a requirement that we just discussed in this video. And we also include here that management must include our review report and anything that they include the financial statements with. And that was a requirement in the last video that we discussed. Then we can add some other information that's not necessarily required, but is typically included. For instance, our fees, or maybe some timing discussion, or maybe some disclaimers and such like that. And then here we have management signed the report, and we signed the report, or the engagement letter here. So we see here in this example engagement letter, we've included all of the items that were required in this section for this video, as well as the premise and management's responsibilities, which we discussed in the prior video. And here for the tax basis of accounting, we have all of the same inclusions as what we just talked about in the first example. And I believe the only difference might be that management is required to, or management is supposed to acknowledge its responsibility to include a discussion of what the tax basis of accounting means. And they have it right here. Okay. So you remember from the last video, if the financial statements are being prepared on a special purpose framework, which would be the tax basis, then management's required to include in the footnotes of the financial statements discussion of what tax basis means and how it's different from GAAP. And so in our engagement letter, we're supposed to obtain management's acknowledgement that it's required to include those disclosures in the financial statements. So then everything else will be the same, with GAAP being replaced by tax basis. And here we have it signed by management and by us. So now that we have determined and agreed on some terms on the engagement with management, we will, in the next several videos, go through how to perform the engagement.